Hi there guys, got a nice quick video here for you today on the BRK Ghost, and what we're going to be doing in this one is showing you how to adjust the trigger. So this is a question that I get asked a fair amount, so I thought I'd put the process in video format just so you can see what's going on. With that said, before we begin, the first thing we need to do is make sure that the rifle is safe to work on by first cocking the rifle, then removing our magazine or single shot loader if one is fitted. Then we can close the bolt and fire the rifle into a nice safe backstop. I've already done that just to save us a little bit of time, and you will also notice that the rifle is missing the bottle and the bottom rail. Now, it's not recommended or needed to fully degas the rifle in order to adjust the trigger, so you certainly don't have to do that if you don't want to. This rifle is just one that I'm currently working on, and as you can see it's missing a few parts, but will be fully usable for this demonstration. I've also removed the bottom rail from the bottom here, although most of the trigger adjustments can be accessed through the slot here. For the video it's a little easier if I just remove that, so that's gone on this rifle. With that said, the only other thing I'll mention before we get started is showing you how to decock the rifle. So typically speaking, when you cock the rifle, you pull the cocking arm back, push your bolt forward, and then the rifle is ready to fire. If you don't want to release the hammer from the back there, what you can do is decock the rifle by pulling the cocking arm all the way back, lightly holding it in position, then depressing the trigger. You'll hear a small click, and once you have that done, you can hold the trigger back and then push the cocking arm forward once again. And as you can see there, the rifle is decocked. Once you get the hang of it, it's a nice simple process, but I do that quite a bit when I'm setting the triggers. So once again, let's pull the cocking arm back, hold it lightly in position, then pull the trigger. Right then, so I've brought you in nice and close, and the first thing we're going to be doing is taking a look at all the adjuster screws, and I'll be explaining what they do. The first thing we're going to do is flip the rifle up, and as you can see here we have 3 adjuster screws exposed. At this point I do want to mention that there are another 2 beneath the trigger post, so we're going to get this piece of material out of the way so I can show you those as well. To do that, all we're doing is loosening the screw in the side of the trigger post, then that can just be slid off the dovetail. So that's just that screw there. That's done with a 1.5mm Allen key. With that out of the way, we've exposed the 5 adjuster screws in the trigger plate, and I'll just run through them very briefly. So this first one at the front here controls the position of the trigger blade relative to the rifle, so it controls the position of the blade both forward and back, and typically speaking you want it to be nice and vertical relative to the rifle. Adjusting this screw in brings the trigger blade back, and adjusting it out brings the trigger blade forward, and again you want to find the balancing point to which the trigger blade is nice and vertical. Our next grub screw, this one here, controls the trigger weight. Going in with this screw increases weight, coming out decreases weight. The only thing I will say is that this cannot be above flush with the trigger plate itself. If it's above flush, the trigger post won't slide back onto the dovetail, so just be aware of that. The third adjuster, this one here, is the over travel for the trigger once the rifle has been fired. So when you pull to the second stage, as soon as you break through the second stage, this screw here controls how far you're able to pull the trigger back. Typically speaking, this is a factory only adjustment, and you shouldn't need to touch this when you're adjusting your trigger, but I will show you the process for adjusting this when we come to adjusting the trigger. The next adjustment screw, this one here, is the safety adjuster. If this is done too far in, you will not be able to move the safety bar back and forward, and if it's too far out, the rifle will fire when the rifle is on safe. The last screw, this one at the back here, controls the first stage travel. Going in with this screw reduces first stage travel, and coming out gives you more. We do have one final adjuster that's hidden in the back of the block, so hopefully the camera will pick it up there. But if you look just behind the final grub screw on the trigger plate, there is another grub screw just at the back here. This one is used to control the amount of sear engagement. It can be used to adjust the second stage of the rifle. So if you have a second stage that's creeping, you need to adjust this back one. Second stage creep can be defined as any further movement in the trigger once you hit the second stage stop. So once you hit the second stage stop, any further movement should fire the rifle. And if you find yourself needing to pull the trigger through the second stage once you've reached the second stage stop, that would be defined as trigger creep. Right then, with that little explanation out the way, you should be able to adjust your trigger exactly as you want it. However, what I've gone ahead and done now is fully adjust the trigger and totally ruin it. So none of the trigger features actually work, and what we're going to be doing now is go through the process of resetting the trigger back to a working and nice trigger. So if we take a look at it now, you can see that there's no movement in the trigger post whatsoever. The safety is stuck, so the safety won't move whatsoever, and the rifle won't latch if we try and cock it. So there's no holding the hammer back, the hammer is just floating. But not to worry, luckily it's nice and easy to adjust the trigger, so we're just going to go through things nice and slowly and fix the trigger. Right then, so I've brought you back in nice and close, and then I've also removed the trigger post just so we have access to all of the screws. The first thing we're going to do is use a 1.5mm Allen key just to bring all the grub screws up flush with the trigger plate so that they're not proud but are just flush with the top here. So I'll do that now. With all of the grub screws flush with the top of the trigger plate, we know none of them are going to interfere when we try and adjust things. The next thing we can do is get the second stage to latch once again. Again, to do this, I'm going to be taking my 1.5mm Allen key. I'm going to be inserting it into this grub screw here, and I'm going to be bringing this grub screw out about half a turn at a time. So there's the first half a turn there. We can then test the cocking arm, so bringing that all the way back and seeing if the rifle latches. So at the moment it's still not latching, so we need to again come out about another half a turn. Test that once again, and at the moment there we can see it's latching. So for now I'm going to be leaving it where it is. We will fine adjust the second stage in a minute, but for now we're just going to get the rest of the trigger working. The first thing I'm going to do is get this trigger plate here level and parallel with the top surface of the block. To do that, we're going to be adjusting this front screw here, again using our 1.5mm Allen key. Getting it roughly level by eye, then we can bring over our trigger post, slide that over, we don't need to tighten it at the moment, and then check that the post itself is nice and vertical when looking at the block. We can then fine adjust the position. Roughly about there, that looks good to my eye, maybe just a hair back. There we go, that looks pretty much perfect to me, so we can go ahead and right the block and then slide the post off once again. The next thing we're going to do is adjust the first stage and get that where we need it, and again that's done by using a 1.5mm Allen key to adjust this screw at the back here. We're just going to be going in about a turn at a time until we get our correct first stage. So cocking the rifle, then pushing the trigger plate to decock it. If you wanted to, or you found it easier, you could also reinstall the trigger post just onto the front there, lightly tighten that into position, and then test your first stage travel like that if you found it easier. First stage travel is a purely personal preference type thing. Some people like a nice short first stage. And there we have it. So I've got about 2 or 3 millimeters of first stage travel there. That's pretty much perfect for me, so I'm going to leave it there. As we're doing that, you can see that the rifle is on safe, but we're able to fire the rifle without much issue whatsoever. What we're going to be doing now is readjusting the safety screw, which is this screw here, second from the back. To do that, all we're going to do is set the rifle on safe, then come in through the top and just do the grub screw up until we feel it lightly contact the safety bar. So about there. We don't need to do this up tight, we just need to get it touching, then back it out about half a turn. With that done, we can check that the safety bar goes backwards and forwards nice and freely, which it does. Then we can test that the safety works by cocking the rifle and then dry firing it. As you can see there, we're pushing on the trigger and we can actually push really quite hard and the rifle isn't going off. But as soon as we flick it over to the safe, pull the trigger, you can see that the rifle now fires. With that all done, the trigger at the moment is fully functioning, and whilst it doesn't feel absolutely perfect, you could shoot the rifle just like this. What I'm going to do now is just fine tune everything and get it exactly how I like it. So the first stage travel is pretty much where I want it to be, but we still do have a tiny amount of second stage creep. So I'm not quite sure if the camera will pick this up, but if you focus on this back edge of the trigger, as I pull it up to the second stage stop, I do have a little bit of movement there in the trigger before the rifle goes off. Now I want to remove that, so to do that I'm going to leave the rifle decocked, take my 1.5mm Allen key and get into this very backmost screw here. Then I'm going to go in about 1/8 of a turn. Once I've done that, I can recheck the trigger. Again, that feels much better, but we'll go in a little further. Again, tiny amounts of adjustment here. We're going about 1/8 of a turn. A little bit more. At the moment there, we've gone too far and the rifle will no longer latch, so we'll just come out a tiny bit. And after a little bit of messing around, we're there. At the moment, we have no real feelable second stage creep, although the rifle is now cocking and firing exactly as it should. The only thing I'll mention about this rearmost adjuster here is that you do want a little bit of engagement between the sears. If this screw is done in too far, it may cause a scenario where the rifle will cock, but if you bang the rifle on a table or drop it when you're out in the field, the rifle may fire of its own accord. What I like to do is get it to latch like it is now, then adjust the screw out just a tiny little bit, just so I have a little bit of engagement between the sears, so the rifle passes a bump test. I will also mention it is worth rechecking your trigger adjustments after you do a few pellets. Once you cycle the rifle a few times, the trigger will bed in and some adjustments may microscopically change. There is also another 2 adjustments beneath the trigger post, so I'll just show you them once again. We have this one here, which is your trigger weight. That's pretty much perfect for me. I like it to be flush. That's the lightest you can make this trigger without replacing parts. Although if you wanted a heavier trigger, you just need to wind this in to your desired preference. The last adjustment is this one here, which is the over travel. You can just leave this flush if you want, or left at the factory setting is probably better. This one is nice and easy to adjust. All we do is take the screw, wind it all the way in until it stops. Again, you don't need to do this up tight, it just needs to stop against the block. Then we can wind it out about 2 full turns. Then we can cock the rifle and make sure it still fires. So it fires, and then after you push through the second stage, the trigger stops nice and closely against the block. So there's not a tremendous amount of over travel in the trigger there, so that's pretty much perfect for me. Again, I would probably recommend just to leave this at the factory setting, as if you do it too far in, the rifle will not fire, but I thought I'd mention it anyway. The last thing we can do is slide our trigger post back onto the trigger plate. Get that in the position that you like. This is on a dovetail, so you can move it forward and backward to your liking once you have it in the position that you want it in. you can just tighten the small clamp screw on the side there. And again, that's done with a 1.5mm Allen key. With that all said and done, that's about it. There's only one more thing that I would like to mention, and that's when you first get your rifle, I would recommend recording any trigger adjustments you make to the rifle, just in case you ever want to go back to the factory settings. With that all said and done, that's pretty much going to do it for this particular video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been interesting or useful. We'll see you in the next one.